And the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded.
As a remnant of antiquity, money now largely serves as a mechanism of corruption, deprivation, and control in the hands of a few.
It's corrupted everything. I mean, every institution that we live in is corrupted by money. What's fascinating to me is that we can become enslaved by something that we've created. Not physically, but just mentally enslaved by a notion that was invented by humanity. You know, it is archaic because I think we've grown past what money can do.
It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and money system, or if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford, Ford Motor Company.
In a desperate attempt to survive, many work multiple jobs. They may steal, lie, or embezzle.
So stress-producing that the average person worries about rent, losing their job, can't pay off the house.
On a bigger scale, the profit motive creates a ruthless cycle of devastation. Illness, pollution, and war are accepted as normal.
You have sort of a wartime economy that begins to be self-perpetuating, and you have powerful people inside of a power vacuum, really, you know, who see it as in their interest to perpetuate the conflict.
But it does benefit the few at the top who live parasitically by the manipulation and control of money.
The banking system right now is effectively enslaving individuals, enslaving students, enslaving institutions, and sucking resources from them.
They set it up so that there would be private central banks that could charge everybody interest on the currency and allow themselves to get rich without having to do anything. Who's been doing all of this? It's a group of bankers, the Federal Reserve System, that's a private system.
The Fed is a private bank owned by private stockholders. Do not let the name Federal fool you.
They just serve the banking needs of government is essentially what they do.
In 1913, which is when Woodrow Wilson allowed the Federal Reserve System legislation to be passed, most of the Congress people had gone home.
This legislation turned the central bank system of the United States over to the Federal Reserve Board, making them the only group that could issue Federal Reserve notes or U.S. dollars.
President Wilson, he regretted that. He said that he had just sold this country downstream.
A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. A government by the opinion and the duress of small groups of dominant men. President Woodrow Wilson, 1916.
It's a fiat system that we operate under, and it's actually someone punching numbers on a computer somewhere. That is how we manufacture money today.
There's nothing backing it, there's nothing behind it.
The money is backed up by the full faith one has in the U.S. government. It's an IOU.
When government spends more than it collects in taxes and needs money, it does not print its own money, but borrows from the Federal Reserve in exchange for U.S. bonds, which the Fed provides at interest. When people and corporations want money, they go to banks as well. The system is rigged. If a bank buys a $100 bond, the bank gets to lend out 10 times that amount, or $1,000. They created the extra funds from nothing. No money, gold, or anything to back it up. The bank also gets back the loans with interest for all the money lent. Money is created this way from the simple signature of a borrower with the promise to pay it back. And to make matters worse, very often people are paying the amount back many times over due to the interest. This is the process by which individuals, companies, and governments acquire money. It is respectably referred to as fractional reserve lending and is used globally by most other banking systems, keeping people and entire nations in perpetual debt.
So if you just keep printing dollars with no backing, at a certain point, people lose confidence in the currency, and that's what's happened.
The banking system right now is in the business of manufacturing risk by creating debt for individuals and people. And so there is the risk that those people will not pay that debt back. But the liabilities for the risk have been and continue to be assigned to the U.S. taxpayer in the U.S. currency.
We're now sitting in a situation where the world's currencies are about to crash. Nobody knows how long it's going to take, but the Federal Reserve System has been printing dollars like there's no tomorrow.
You have what is effectively a criminal enterprise based on the manipulation of people's attention, resources, and time in order to extract value from them.
They're stealing money from us that way. They're stealing the result of our efforts and our labor.
And that is something that has grown as a cancer on our society.
These bankers are all part of a system called the Bank for International Settlements.
Most people, even in business and banking, don't understand this bank and its role as the BIS.
They own 40% of the assets of the 43,000 companies that are traded on the capital markets.
The bank runs itself. It has a board of directors which is composed of 15 governors of central banks from around the world.
And they pull down 60% of the annual earnings. They bought up all our media, and that media is hoodwinking citizens.
The media has morphed into just peddling the corporate interests of the money masters that control the political establishment. There's about 118 boards of directors that sit on these 5 giant media corporations, and they all serve different boards of Monsanto to weapons to food. So when you have all these interests bleeding together, it's that much harder to differentiate what interests you're seeing laid out in the mainstream media.
Fair, balanced.
If you want to understand power, you have to understand who nominates candidates, not understand who votes for candidates. Our system is not a democracy. The percentage of our population that participates in the nomination process is literally less than 5% of the population, and really less than 1% of the population. If I was in control of the nominating process of everything that everybody ate, and I always nominated cheeseburgers or fried chicken, and I told you that it was a democracy and you could eat anything you want as long as it was a cheeseburger or fried chicken, would that be a democracy? I could sell it to you as a democracy because I don't decide whether to eat cheeseburgers or fried chicken. You get to vote in a very large and well-publicized election as to whether we're going with fried chicken or cheeseburgers. And people organize into very tribal groups, being very anti-fried chicken and very pro-cheeseburger, or they'll explain to you exactly why cheeseburgers are going to be the end of the world and why fried chicken's going to save you.
Those who can afford it hire lobbyists who essentially buy politicians. Most of the time, either party will suit their needs.
Definition of a lobbyist in the United States is someone who advocates for someone else and is getting paid for it.
The laws then enacted are quite often written by the corporations to benefit themselves.
Professor Thurber sees an underground explosion in lobbying and estimates the industry actually brings in more than $9 billion a year, exceeded only by tourism and government.
The reason that we aren't changing things right now is the banks have lobbyists in Washington in numbers I've never seen.
Lobbyists are strictly there to buy access. They are not there to enhance the democratic process. Families and working people just don't have that kind of representation, power, or influence to look after their needs.
There's actually a lobbyist for Citibank when we're talking about Volcker Rule and Dodd-Frank who literally rewrote an amendment to Dodd-Frank. It was not written by any politician. It wasn't even written by a politician's underling in his office. It was written by a Citibank lobbyist.
They've designed the system to reinforce and, in a sense, finance themselves based off of special interest.
Everything that was around in 2007, 2008 that we get so scared about, the mortgage-backed securities, the credit default swaps, the other derivatives, they still exist. They absolutely do. And yes, there's higher capital requirements for the banks, so they can't be as leveraged, but those are not that high.
And if we don't have a media that's providing who's really like writing these bills and passing this legislation and what it's all for and who it serves, then we're living in an illusion.
Well, I think that generally the laws in this country are written by the wealthy and the powerful, because I mean, I think by definition that's who controls the legislatures and the commanding heights of the power system in this country.
And that's a scary reality, because you can pay your way into having laws implemented that serve you and your corporation as you would like them to serve.
The complete impunity that corporations have to operate unabated and pollute the entire planet.
A major spill of toxic coal ash is raising questions again about the safety of water and the government regulators overseeing industry.
There's zero accountability. I mean, other than slap on the wrist of a couple fines here and then. I mean, slave labor to the exploitation of resources on the planet.
The massive inferno sent flames into the night sky, fueled by crude oil from ruptured tank cars.
The Transportation Secretary, Anthony Fox, can merely advise the industry that these rail cars are not fit for service. But this advice is only voluntary. And so, the slap on the wrist of industries that pollute, cut corners, and violate policies will continue as long as it's profitable to do so.
JP Morgan paid $13 billion in fines last year. If you have that much money in order to just pay fines, and they put away $19 billion for paying fines.
JP Morgan is paying $410 million to settle charges with the government, but JP Morgan is not admitting any wrongdoing.
Goldman Sachs settled early on in this case for $550 million without admitting wrongdoing.
UBS has agreed to pay about $50 million. Under the terms of the settlement, UBS did not admit any wrongdoing.
Well, I think that people commit the crimes that they're in a social position to commit. I think it was Bertolt Brecht that asked, which is a greater crime, to rob a bank or to own one? And I think as we've seen from everything from the savings and loan scandals to the Wall Street meltdown, that all too often the owners of the banks are frequently looting the institutions that employ them. They commit all manner of illegal acts, and yet they're very rarely prosecuted for them.
To establish their footing, industries often hire politicians when they leave office, having direct ties in furthering the bonds between politics and business.